Welcome to Module 2 of the Inclusion of Special Populations Regulation 703 KAR 5:070. Module 2 will focus on the 13 general accommodation conditions often seen in state assessments, from being used routinely during instruction to changes in administration or recording of answers and their consistency. Note, the page number on the slide represents the location the information is found in the regulation document itself. In the notes section of slide 3, there are specific comments made about conditions 1 through 7. You also note the page location for each condition where it can be found in the regulation. Please reference the regulation for information specific to these conditions. For 1, used routinely during instruction, school staff must make available to the student accommodations used consistently as part of routine instruction and classroom assessment, but may not instruct their students on when to use accommodations. Proctors may review with the student the accommodations in their IEP, 504 plan, or program service plan, remind students that proctors are there to provide the accommodations, and revisit this information at the beginning of each test session. Students have the right to decline use of an accommodation. If a student has human-provided accommodations, example a reader or a scribe or assistive technology, the adult or that version of technology shall be in the testing room prior to testing and shall remain there throughout the testing period. Accommodations for many students may be considered transitional strategies and should be faded as appropriate and as the student gains the skills necessary for an independent level of academic performance. It is very important that as the student progresses throughout their school years, that the focus on those accommodations are more of an independent focus and that they're faded over time. On 3, accommodations shall not impact the content validity being measured. Accommodations outlined in this regulation are considered appropriate for state-required assessments when the accommodations are administered according to the directions in this regulation. For 4, accommodations shall be age-appropriate and clearly described in the student's educational plan. 5, accommodations shall be for the purpose of students accessing the general education curriculum. Accommodations allow students to demonstrate what they know and are able to do so independently. Accommodations shall in no way lead the student to the correct answer. For 6, accommodations shall always be based on the individual needs of the student and not on a disability category. An example of that would be an emotional behavioral disabilities, specific learning disabilities, multiple disabilities, other health impairments. Those are all specific disability types. Those plans should never be developed around a disability type, but the actual individual needs of that student. And number 7, accommodations do not provide a substitute for high quality instructional practices. They should never be supplemented in place of providing day-to-day instruction for a student. In the notes section of slide 4, there are specific comments made about conditions 8 through 13. You also note the page location for each condition where it can be found in the regulation. Please reference the regulation for information specific to these conditions. On number 8, evaluation information or ongoing progress data should support the need for intervention and accommodations in a specified area of need. This data, whether it be current or longitudinal data, should support the evidence that whether the student still needs the use of that accommodation or if they are able to provide or utilize their services independently and no longer require it. For 9, accommodations shall be part of the student's ongoing instructional program and not introduced immediately prior to the state required assessments. Now, I do want to emphasize that this does not mean that students cannot have a change in a plan during testing time or right before testing time. The main thing here is that it's not for testing purposes only. You're going to see scenarios throughout in the training, the actual inclusion of special populations training, where it's discussed about the impact that providing an accommodation right at the time of testing or during testing can have. But one thing to note is if you have evidence or data to support the change in the conference summary and it's shown throughout, it is acceptable if that situation occurs. It's also noted in there that making a change just for testing purposes, if they've not been used routinely throughout the instructional process, that could be a deterrent to the student, and they could actually end up performing more poorly than not even having access to that accommodation in the first place. On 10, caution shall be used prior to making educational plan changes related to accommodations near or within the state required assessment window. Changes can occur based on the time an annual meeting is to occur. It is important that any change made is supported through data and evidence. As we talked about, in 9, the data must support the change, but also you want to caution that when you make plans near testing, that everyone who is involved with assessment is familiar and is made aware that those changes are occurring. On 11, for considering technology first, the use of technology shall be the first accommodation considered before adult provided accommodations. For example, readers, scribes, if it's feasible. A shortage of workstations, software, physical space, or training shall not be used as a reason for failing to provide assistive technology as an accommodation. It's understood that there are situations that occur with bandwidth or access to certain devices where it could eliminate or provide difficulty to provide certain technological services. However, we do encourage the use of technology, as that is something that the student can access as they continue their educational career. Test administrators and parties involved with testing the student shall be informed of all student accommodations entitled to that student prior to state required assessments in order to ensure students' needs are met. So for number 12, informing everyone about the student's needs, that is a definite and one that we see all too often in regards to students' plans changing and not every party that is involved with the assessment process being made aware of those plans changing. That is typically one of the leading allegation deterrents there, or allegation recommendations there, is because that not everyone involved is made aware of those changes. And the last one is changes in the administration of the assessment or recording of student responses shall be consistent with the instructional strategies, assistive technology devices, and services identified on the student's education plan. The selection of the accommodation shall be based on data analysis that support the decision process being made. Once again, that information needs to be made available in their plan. It needs to be consistent with the instruction that's been provided and the process that occurs on a day-to-day basis. So this concludes Module 2, General Conditions of the Inclusion of Special Populations Regulation 703 KAR 5:070. If you have specific questions about the inclusion of special populations training, Module 2, or any module related to this training, please feel free to contact KDE DAC Information at dacinfo@education.ky.gov or by calling 502-564-4394. Thank you for your time and participation.